I am very thrilled to introduce you all to Kelley Robinson. She's going to speak for a little bit, and then we'll do a little bit of an interview, and then opening it up to you guys for Q&A. So please drop those questions in the chat as we go. So Kelley is the president of the Human Rights Campaign. She is the first Black queer woman to lead the organization and came to HRC after serving as the executive director of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Kelley started her career as a community organizer for Barack Obama in 2008 presidential campaign in Missouri. And she has spent more than 15 years on the front line of progressive movements as a champion for inclusion. And she centered her career around fighting for bodily autonomy and racial and gender equity. And she focuses on lifting up marginalized communities and building political power, which is what we are here to talk about tonight. So we are going to kick it over to Kelley, and we'll spotlight you and bring you on up here.
All right. Thank you to the Julies. I am so happy to be here with y'all. And I also, just so you know, I have my little friend here, Isaiah. We'll see how long the screen entertains my wonderful 2-year-old. But I'm excited to be here with you all. I mean, 2024 is here, right? We had the first GOP debate where they didn't waste any time, not giving any solutions to the biggest problems that are impacting our folks, and at the same time making a ton of space to attack our right to education, to attack trans kids' rights to live, just as a part of their political performance. So I'm excited to talk with y'all because this is a group of people that knows that we have something that we can do about it. As Julie said, my name's Kelley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm proud to serve as president of the Human Rights Campaign. I'm like 10 months in, so, you know, a whole pregnancy into being in this job. And so far, it's been a roller coaster. I mean, highest highs of my life and lowest lows. Yeah, I'll say this because I have my 2-year-old here. I think for me, I came to HRC shortly after the fall of Dobbs, after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I've been at Planned Parenthood like 13 years, doing every job in the place, from being a regional organizer to being a patient advocate to ending off. Uh-oh, it died. Here you go, baby. Here, do this. Sorry, I'm using screens tonight. Apologies. Don't tell my wife. But I'd been doing every job in the place. And after Roe fell, it was so clear to me, as you know, Justice Clarence Thomas said in his opinion, that they weren't just going to stop there, that they were coming after every part of our lives and every part of our freedoms that we fought for, not just over the last 30 years, not just over the last 40 years, but over the last 400. And for me, when Dobbs fell, I was about, our child, who's our lovely child, was 1 year old. And my wife and I had gotten married in 2020, so just 2 years before. It was a real call for me to fight for my family in a way that I'd never thought about before, but really felt called to. So being at HRC has really been, you know, the blessing of a lifetime, but also kind of the challenge is so clear because everything that's happening right now is playing out in a very familiar format. And I think for me, like ultimately, when I think about why I do this work, it is to protect my family. You know, my kid, he's 2 years old now. And he had his birthday on August 1st. So I was taking him all around DC. I took the day off. We're having like a DC day. We went to like get coffee, get a pastry. We went to Sbarro because if you don't know, on your birthday, Sbarro gives you a free slice of pizza. So I was like, okay, Isaiah, we're going everywhere that we need to do. That's my kid's name, to get all of your free birthday things. And you're only going to eat a little, so I'll eat the rest. But it was amazing to me that walking around the streets of DC, and he's a little, you know, brown child, born to two moms, and everyone I talked to, no matter if they were young or old, if they were Black, white, Asian, anything in between, every one of them was just so affirming of him and his life and his existence. They were loving on this child. They were giving him free things. Somebody gave him a pencil. I don't know if you're supposed to give 2-year-olds pencils, but he got it that day. And it couldn't help but to be a bittersweet moment for me, because as much love as they were giving him on his birthday at 2 years old, I couldn't help but to think about O'Shea Sibley. I couldn't help but to think about Camden Ryder, right? These people that were murdered simply because of their identity. And I just thought to myself, like, what happens in the world that This brown child at 2 years old is given every piece of love people have to offer. But when he turns 10, or when he turns 12, or when he turns 16, or when he decides what he's going to do with his sexuality and his gender, all of a sudden he becomes a threat. All of a sudden his life becomes less valuable. And it just got me to thinking, like, essentially what we are fighting for is every kid to be loved and affirmed, right? Every kid to be able to get the same sorts of affirmations that they do at the age of 16 and 25 and 30 and through the rest of their lives, regardless of their race, their gender identity, or their sexuality. And it's just really ringing true for me right now, because seeing what's happened, especially in the last couple of months, the excessive amounts of violence targeting our community is real. I mean, 1 in 5 of every hate crime is motivated by anti-LGBTQ plus bias. We see murders like Lori Carlton in California, murdered for flying her pride flag. You see murders like O'Shea Sibley in New York, murdered because he's voguing at a gas station. We've seen some of the highest rates of murder for Black trans women that we ever have before. And this isn't coming out of nowhere. This is coming because people are stoking the flames of hate and bias actively, and only for one sole purpose: to gain political points. Just this last year, we've seen over 500 pieces of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation introduced in states all across the country, nearly half of which have targeted trans people, and many targeting trans kids. And on top of that, nearly 80 have been signed into law. And for me, even when these bills aren't signed into law, they are accompanied with campaigns of hate. In Florida, around their Don't Say Gay or Trans bills that have been moving across the state, we saw a 400% increase in anti-LGBTQ rhetoric online, violent language, bullying our community. We've seen 1 in 5 of all hate crimes be motivated by anti-LGBTQ plus bias. This is real. They are using these sorts of fear tactics in business and in our community to stoke fear. And that fear is causing real life harm and violence on real people's lives. So for the first time ever in HRC's history, in June, we declared a nationwide state of emergency for LGBTQ plus people in response to these bad bills that have been passing, but also in response to the violent culture that's been accompanying it. I mean, these laws, the types that we're seeing pass, include book bans and censoring curriculum in classrooms. They include forbidding trans kids from being able to safely use the bathroom at school. They include prohibiting trans kids from playing sports with their friends, and even keeping trans kids from being able to receive life-saving, gender-affirming health care. And the purpose of these laws is simple and clear. The Alliance to Defend Freedom, a group that's been designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, before all these attacks started happening in state legislators across the country, they actually said out loud that the reason that they were going after trans kids in state legislatures was simply to gain political points. That is a direct quote from that organization. They said that they threw a bunch of ideas at the wall, and this is the one that stuck. So we have to be clear that none of this is about protecting our families. None of this is about protecting our communities. It is simply and purely for a political gain that they are attacking children at this point. And I just gotta believe that our nation and our community is better than this. So a couple things I want to remind folks. One, we have to be clear, and y'all have already said it on this call, that this violent extremism that you're hearing, it is not the majority of people. They may be yelling loudly, but they do not represent the majority of people in this country. The majority of people think that state legislatures are spending too much time obsessing over attacking trans youth. The majority of people in this country support access to gender-affirming health care for everyone. The majority of people in this country support non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus people. I mean, the numbers that we're looking at are higher than, people that love Beyonce when it comes to non-discrimination for our community. So let's be clear that we are on the side of the majority in this. Our job is to make sure that that majority is activated, that our majority is turning out to vote, and that our majority is engaged. When people ask me what they can do, I say two things. One, well, there's a lot of things you can do, let's be clear, but a couple of things are really front of mind for me. One, I think that too many of us are being silent when we hear things that are just not right. Too many allies are not speaking up loudly enough when we hear things that are just not right. And I think right now, folks feel like they don't have the tools or the language to talk about things like gender affirming care, to talk about trans kids playing sports. And we've got to educate ourselves and be better, because every time that we are silent, we're allowing the lies to be perpetuated in communities that are just untrue. So from HRC, we've got some resources. We've got things like the Parents for Trans Gender Equality National Council, a group of parents that are modeling love, acceptance, and affirmation for their trans children, and also offering resources to other parents. We've got a Welcoming Schools program. This is the most comprehensive bias-based bullying prevention program in the nation, where we've got professionals all across the country that are giving teachers the tools that they need to create welcoming classrooms, even when the states won't. And we also have a program called Count Me In. This is a community of allies that are out here allying. They're joining the fight actively to stand up for trans and non-binary people and taking actions every single week to make sure that we're making our voices heard. And then the second thing I tell people, speak up and make sure you get out to vote. Y'all, you know it, especially in some of the states that you're in the Ohios, the Pennsylvanias of the world, the Michigans of the world. The election is here, right? Not only that, we've got some elections this year that are happening in places like Virginia, Kentucky, and Mississippi. They're actually going to be the bellwether for 2024. So if you've got friends and family that live in those states, let them know that they need to get out to vote this year. We're already seeing an astronomical amount of money spent on anti-trans ads targeting voters, right? We need to make sure that people are up, that they're speaking loud, and they're saying out loud that they're not going to put up for that. And then, of course, in 2024, I can't say anything less than everything is literally on the line right now. We at HRC have identified 62 million American voters who prioritize LGBTQ plus issues when deciding who to vote for. 62 million. So I've heard enough about Moms for Liberty, all right? I've heard enough about MAGA Republicans. I want to talk about these equality voters, because we have a strength base that if we are able to turn out, we will win. And you don't have to look far, right? Look at Ohio. Y'all are on the call. When we turned out our voters, we beat that special election, defended democracy, defended reproductive freedom, and are making sure that we also hold the ground for gender affirming care in the state by protecting the right to protecting the ballot in Ohio. Look at Michigan. In 2022, we put boots on the ground there, built a coalition called Hate Won't Win, and together we elected a pro-equality majority in the state house. We reelected Gretchen and Governor Whitmer, and within months, Michigan became the 22nd state to make LGBTQ plus non-discrimination protections law. And you can even look at the federal level. In 2024, we took back, in 2020, I'm manifesting here 2024, but in 2020, we took back the White House, and that was no small feat. And since then, since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been in office, they have been the most pro-LGBTQ plus administration we have ever seen. And I'm not just talking about representation, although they have it, from Karine Jean-Pierre to Admiral Rachel Levine to Secretary Pete Buttigieg and more. They've got the representation, but I'm also talking about the policy. They have advanced critical policy to protect our communities, to leverage every piece of the federal government to do what we can to protect us. Not only that, it's under President Biden, the Respect for Marriage Act was actually signed into law, guaranteeing our right to marriage in this country, especially in the midst of the courts as they are. I can't say enough how important that was. So look, we know 2024 is on the horizon, but we also know that we can win. And I think, this year, this is one of those years where, people talk about, y'all hear this all the time, the enthusiasm gap that's out there. And at the end of the day, the thing that bridges the enthusiasm gap is turning people out around the issues, making it matter, making it not just about the candidates, but exactly what's at stake. And it's groups like yours, it's groups like ours that make that real to people. So y'all, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be in conversation with you. I'm excited that my child hasn't screamed or thrown his watermelon at me just yet, but let's see how the rest of the hour goes. Julie, let's talk. What do you want to talk about? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I said, okay, I will come on up and speak. So you answered a couple of my questions, but we'll just kind of jump in here. So we are seeing a ton of disinformation out there, right? So being targeted very specifically. I'm sorry, disinformation specifically about the LBGTQ plus community. How do you combat that? Like, how do we fight back against that just horrendous information that's being spewed all over the internet and even through our media?
Absolutely. I mean, some of it is as simply as calling a lie a lie. I think right now they are out here saying things that are just untrue. In Georgia, at the end of the 2022 cycle, some of our opposition, the American Principles Project and others, put $1 million or $2 million into the state at the end of the cycle, trying to make voters believe that Joe Biden wanted to forcefully castrate their children. That's what the ad said. And we have to say that is a lie. We have to call these horrific things that they're saying lies. And I think also call out exactly how dangerous it is. Because when they say things like that, it puts a target on the back of trans people and trans kids. And I think we have to be really clear about that. So one, I think it is calling a lie a lie. The other thing is, I think that there's a large number of people that simply don't have the information, right? They don't believe that they know a trans person. Right now, there's a stat out there that says more people believe that they have seen a ghost than a trans person. So when we talk about the visibility, when we talk about the representation, for a lot of people, it's simply not there yet. And I think what's really happening that's dangerous right now is that those people, because they don't feel like they have enough information, are either believing the lie or staying silent. So I think it's incumbent upon us to give people the information that they need, and two, to listen and to tell our stories. Because at the end of the day, we've got to be clear that what's happening to trans people right now could happen to any of us. And in fact, has happened to most of us, right? The same things they're saying about trans people, they were saying about lesbian, gay, and bi people 25 years ago, right? And now the Respect for Marriage Act is the law of the land. The same things they're saying about trans people, they were certainly saying about Black people, right? 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And now we're in a fundamentally different space. So we do know that we can change culture in this way, but a lot of it is about people telling their stories and being empathetic about and rooting themselves in values, and us trying to correct the record about some things that are just straight lies our opposition's saying.
So for people, and your staff has been dropping amazing resources. By the way, HRC's resources are just phenomenal. If you've never checked them out, I've been sent them multiple times. So go check all of those out. But for people who maybe do need to get educated, like to explain, where would you recommend people go who really do want to be able to push back and call this a lie and explain to their neighbors and their friends, like, no, that's completely disinformation. Let me tell you the truth. Like, where could people go to learn more?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to give you some HRC resources. Red just putting some of them in the chat. One of them I think is really good. It's like a 2-minute long video that's about gender affirming care, talking about what it actually looks like for children and for adults that need to access the care and services. I think it's a great video because it's like regular language. It features a ton of trans people telling their own stories about gender affirming care, and it's short. So I think that's a really good resource for individuals that want to be able to talk more and to send to your friends. I also encourage folks to follow folks like Alok Vyad Menon. They're on Instagram and do a lot, Instagram and all the other internets. But they share a lot of their story about what it means to live as a trans person. And I think it's that sort of connecting that we actually need to do more of. And then I also just want to remind folks that you don't actually have to have all of the information, right? We can ground ourselves in our stories around why this just isn't right, around how for me, the same things I'm seeing happen to trans people, I've seen happen to Black folks, to queer folks, to women throughout the history of my life. And I know that it's not right. And I think sometimes having that conversation and not needing to have all the answers is also a big piece of it.
That's great. I will say that if you guys also are looking for more information, like this is one of the things Red Wine Blue is trying to do. We are holding, next week, we have Dane coming back to talk about what is gender affirming care. He spoke about a month and a half ago. Everybody loved him. He's a nurse practitioner, very clear, very, helps you really understand this issue so you can speak. We do tons of interviews with people. We have tons of content on our YouTube. So things you can share, just like HRC has videos you can share. Definitely we're trying to make it approachable for people who are kind of new to politics or really don't understand issues or being targeted by disinfo. So there are so many resources. If you need something, please reach out to us. We're happy to provide that. So what do you think if we could wave a magic wand and get rid of gerrymandering, and the majority who actually believes is on our side on this could elect politicians who also believe these things? What could we accomplish? Like, what are the things that could be passed? Like, what differences could be made?
Oh man. Oh, what a good question. I mean, there's some baseline stuff that I think that we just have to achieve. The Equality Act not being the law of the land is a big one, right? In more than half of the country, there are not guaranteed non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus people. What that means is that today in 2023, a lesbian couple could go to a restaurant in Texas and be turned away simply for being together. It means that today in 2023, a trans person could go to a salon in Florida and be turned away for being trans. So I think that a lot of folks aren't aware of like exactly how far we have to go, but there's some baseline protections for the community that we need to get right and we need to get clear. And I think if we had that majority, we could get the Equality Act signed into law that would actually do that, affirmatively protect our rights. I also think, I don't know, I think that there's something bigger on the horizon. Like for me, I get really excited thinking about like, what would it look like to have a constitutional amendment, right? Where we're actually affirming that people of color, that folks of every gender have rights in this country from the start. So we don't keep going back to the quote unquote originalist argument. What could it look like to reform the courts in a way so that they are actually a body that is of the people and for the people, right? So I think that there are some concrete things that we need to do that's like the bar we should be able to trip over. Like everybody, it's illegal to discriminate against everybody. So I don't have to wonder, are you discriminating against me because I'm Black or because I'm queer? Like, which one's illegal in this state? But I also wonder if now's a time for us to really start to reimagine what it would look like to create a democracy that was actually by and for the people, for all of us. And there are some pieces of the institution, I think, if we truly had a majority, like a super majority in all the chambers, we could actually do.
You spoke a little bit about how people on this call can be allies, and you talked about speaking up and calling a lie a lie. Any other pieces of advice in terms of like talking to legislators or proactively talking to friends and family, pushing candidates who support our values on this? Any other advice in terms of being an ally?
Absolutely. I do think that there are some folks that need people to ask the questions to that they don't know who to ask, right? And I think that can be us, right? Especially as allies to the trans community. I think being there for people to ask their quote unquote dumb questions is a really good service to offer to the movement. Because I think that's another thing that's keeping people silent. They feel like they don't have enough information. Everyone's afraid of like, I don't want to be canceled, so I'm just not going to say anything at all. And then people who are actually should be allying are falling silent. So I think that there's a role right now to never be silent in the face of people saying something that's incorrect. And two, to be that person that people can ask the questions to, that people can do the figuring it out with without having to do it, with communities that are directly impacted. And then I also think that we've got to be thinking about pulling every lever of change that we have in every way. The thing I love about the Human Rights Campaign is, yes, we are a deeply political organization, just like yourself, talking about how we can make change in policy, in elections, and in government. But we're also thinking about the other aspects of life, right? So, if you're at a company, being a part of your ERG, employee resource group, advocating with your boss or with your management for more effective policies to support the whole community is really important. Maybe right now you need to be talking about, hey, What did you do around Roe v. Wade when people were talking about needing resources to go out of state for care? What does it look like for us to also do that for gender affirming care, right? Starting to really push those questions, starting to ask questions about where companies are doing their political giving and what sort of welcoming programs they have. Being an advocate in your schools. I know y'all talk about this a lot, from school board to the PTA to how you're engaged with your local library. But look, Moms for Liberty is showing up. We have to show up too. We have to make sure that we are vocal and expressing opposition whenever these haters are coming out of the woodwork to try to ban our books, to try to ban talking about our communities. So I really do think that there's ways for us to do it in kind of every area of life. And I always like to say, like, anywhere that I'm spending time during the day, whether it's my church or whether it's, my local recreational sports league, I always want to be thinking about, what does it look like for me to be an advocate in this area?
So any advice for people who want to actively engage in intersectional work in their communities? So for a lot of people, they want to be an ally in that way. They want to do intersectional work, but they don't really know where to start.
I think that we got to be clear that people live intersectional lives, and we do too, right? Whether you're showing up as somebody that's like female identified and an ally, if you're somebody that lives in a rural area and you're a person of color, like, I feel like all of us live at some sort of intersection. I think it's about figuring out, where in my life do I have power and privilege, and how can I use that in service of others? And then two, how do I bring to the forefront the intersections of my own identity to make sure that there's space for everyone? But it's so important. I think right now, especially when we're seeing these like acute attacks on people of color, on workers, and on the LGBTQ community, particularly trans folks, even naming those communities explicitly and thinking about what you can do to support, I think, is equally important.
So I know you guys have a social media presence. I love your advice about, like, you guys should become the people out there who are posting on social media and sharing HRC posts. So then people reach out to you because you become a source of information. So I was also wondering, we're seeing so many book bans happening around the country. Favorite books, what do you recommend people should be reading to really get a good picture of maybe people who have very different lives or perspectives from maybe where they grew up?
Oh yeah. Every banned book I think we should be reading. I saw you've got that banned book club. I love it.
Yeah, I have our Mommy's banned books, but I just wondered if you had any personal favorites that you want to recommend to the audience here.
Yeah. Well, right now for the kiddos, I like The Instructions. Have you read that? Gosh, is it called The Instructions? It's so good. It's this it's a short kids book. It's this fantastical tale, but it's like instructions for life. And at the end of the day, it comes down to being kind, extending trust and giving trust, but also recognizing who people are when they show you. And it's just like a beautiful short book. We read it every night. So I love that one on the kiddo front. Also, Chasten Buttigieg has a great kids book that I think is amazing. And then for the adults in my life, what am I reading right now? What is over there? Oh gosh, I'm still reading Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. So that has nothing to do with anything, but very good beach book.
That's a good book, though. I would like to read that one.
Yeah. And then what else have I been? Oh, I've been reading Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategy, which I think is great. She's a movement leader and talks about how we can create enough space in our movement work to let different strategies emerge and bring different voices to the table. And then I'm also reading Bell Hooks About Love, which is just a great one. Kind of one to always come back to and kind of grounding for me.
I need to steal that. My daughter asked for some Bell Hooks books.
Oh yeah, that's a good
one. She took them
one.
to college, so I need her to come home and I'm gonna steal those from her.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm gonna ask Julie to come up and see what kind of questions we have in the chat, because I feel like we maybe on borrowed time. Isaiah's been so good, but seems like maybe wants a little more mom time. So we're gonna go to the Q&A here.
Yeah, we've got some great questions here. One, I thought this would be a good one to start with. Do you have any stories of how you influenced someone who wasn't supporting the LGBTQ community and convinced them to be an ally?
Oh, sorry. Oh, you're just gonna buy something? That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think my stories around that most often come from my family. Um, I grew up in Chicago, and my family had always been around a lot of different people, but not a lot of folks in my family were out and gay. And when I came out, I think it was really that moment where I had to make a choice. At one point, my members of my family were like, well, just keep it to yourself until your grandma passes. And then, then we can be all celebratory. Don't worry, just wait. And there was this idea of just, waiting for the right time. But there came a moment where I was like, I think the right time is now. So I brought someone home to family dinner, and my family really embraced her. And those that had problems with it, actually, I wasn't the one that had to intervene. I had other people in my family that knew that they loved me, that knew that they cared about the issue, that had taken the time to educate themselves, and use that as an opportunity to call others in. And I think sometimes, I know people have to make a lot of complicated decisions with our families, but I often think that that's like the first site for doing movement building and organizing, is talking to our own. And where we can, I know this isn't everyone, but where you can, taking the risk to be wholly yourself, and then, showing up as an ally to invite other people in. And, ever since then, my whole family has been like adamant supporters. People registered to vote that weren't registered to vote before. They see something on the news and they're like, not my baby, they ain't coming for you. Just to a whole new level. And I don't know if that would have happened without, me taking that first step to trust them enough to love me, even if they felt like they disagreed with me.
Mhm. Okay. So the first question that popped up when you were talking, because you talked about how we're in the majority. So someone asked, if they're in the minority, how are these bills getting through? And I know one of the answers that someone put in was, we have a lot of gerrymandered districts all over the country. Ohio is definitely one of those. But what are your thoughts about that, besides, that kind of a thing, or is that the main thing?
That is it. The only thing I would add to that is that our political system is in disarray in a way that's very dangerous right now. I mean, threatening the whole concept of democracy, because what you have right now, when people are running for office and in politics, you've got folks that are only running in these primaries to appeal to a GOP primary voter, a very extremist voter for the most part. So they're running their whole campaigns on these platforms. They're actually not in step with the general election voter. I mean, if you look at 2022, it's so clear, right? From Arizona to Mastriano to Pennsylvania to everyone else, that you had these candidates that were running with these far extremist positions, especially on abortion. And then when they got to the general election, all that stuff just disappeared from the website. Now you're a different person, huh? Because they're actually playing a political game to win in these gerrymandered districts and to appeal to an extremist primary voter, not a general voter. The other thing that I think is really important as we think about what's necessary if and when, a pro-equality majority is to gain power in 2024, is that a lot of the systems are really threatening the fundamentals of representative democracy. The New York Times did this big piece a couple of years ago where they said that by 2040, 70% of the country will live in 16 states. Imagine that 70% of the country is in 16 states. So the remaining 34 states, especially on the Senate side, will have a disproportionate level of power, right, compared to the rest of the country where the majority of the people will live. And we know that those remaining states, for the most part, are more rural and more conservative than the majority of the rest of the country. This is really a problem. Pair that with inequitable access to the vote, and you're really setting up a situation where it's not truly a representative democracy. And I think that a lot of times what Democrats have tended to do is like get in office and figure out how you help people first. I think this is a moment where if we are to win, the first challenge in front of any Democrat, any pro-equality candidate should be to fix the systems of power first. Because if we can do that, then it will actually protect our ability to help people for the long term.
Yes, and that's just a very scary proposition, especially if they get that math right for the Electoral College. That's a disaster just really waiting to happen for us. I think that your counterpart dropped some good website sources with statistics on how to fight the lies, or information on how to fight the lies. I don't know about you, but I don't like using statistics. I like using facts and real people where you can. But I think he dropped the links in there to that already, but I just wanted to mention it. So and along that, I guess that also maybe would be included the data that would shift undecided, or is there data that would shift undecided or moderate general conservative voters for equality? Is there something that, you know, we could be showing them or talking to them about that, you know, might help change their minds, I guess, is what somebody's asking.
Reg, you might want to jump in there.
Added you. I don't know whether you wanted to be added, but Kelley called you, so I added you.
Well, I show up when Kelley calls. So hi all. I'm Reg. I use here they pronouns, and I'm one of the national campaign directors with HRC. I'll say that when we're trying to convince folks of sort of where we're coming from and trying to find sort of like common ground, I'm a big believer in deep canvassing. I really love connecting with folks on shared values. As a parent, that is like, it is a built-in ground, like common ground finder, because no matter like how you're raising your kids, and I know we all have different ways of raising our kids, we can connect on our kids are really great. We can also connect on sometimes my kids drive me nuts. So, you know, that in and of itself, like that built-in parent role really helps with conversations. I've had a lot of conversations about what it means to be trans, what it means to be a trans kid, what it means to raise trans kids with other adults and with other parents. And ultimately, it is so much easier when I can approach it first as a parent, honestly, and talk about like just talking about that, talking about the everyday, talking about the fact that kids have a really hard time to begin with. We connect there, and then we can sort of like extrapolate out. Julie, I think you just said that you talked about like really putting a face on the thing instead of on the issue, instead of just hitting folks with statistics and facts. And statistics and facts are great as like a nice little button. But people don't necessarily remember statistics and facts, but they do remember the kids that you talk about.
Mm-hmm. That's very accurate. The stories that, you know, that are there, you know, also connecting with someone over the shared value that we all have, that we love our children and care about them. You know, that's also an excellent place to start. Somebody had a side note question. Why can't Ohio beat Jim Jordan? And so Julie had put in there, I saw that he has a gerrymandered district, and he really does. It literally looks like a duck. It starts at Lake Erie and comes all the way down to central Ohio, in Union County, which is right next to Franklin, where Columbus is. So they have managed his district so that the folks that are there, you know, will definitely vote for him and really nowhere else. So I thought I'd answer that one real quick as well. So the next question is, how do you handle fundamentalist religious types in our local communities, like at the school board meetings and city council meetings, which we do actually talk a little bit about at our troublemaker trainings, but what do you guys advise folks to do?
I mean, I think you got to figure out if these are people that are worth engaging with or not, right? Like some folks are too far out there and are not actually the movable middle that we're trying to actually engage in a meaningful dialogue. So I think that's kind of the first step to figure out, is this actually someone I need to engage with or not? And I think it's also about evaluating the forum and the venue that you're in. You know, if you're in a place where it's a public hearing, there might be some things that we actually need to say, that's not true. Let me tell you what the truth is, to make sure that the record doesn't only reflect the lie that they're sharing, but actually course corrects to what the truth is. But for me, a lot of times I think some of these people that are out here spouting hard, like they're not going to come over to our side. It might be worthwhile to let them go out to pasture, right? And figure out who are the people in this room that actually need to get to be heard or that need to be engaged with. I did a lot of religious faith-based organizing when I was coming up, and they said, you know, what the pastor says at the altar matters, but what the people are chattering about in the pews actually matters more. And sometimes we kind of confuse where power sits and need to be doing more of the talking and gathering with the people in the pews.
I agree. I think that's pretty good. Someone asked if there was any grants or funding available for those in the fight, especially where there might be school board members on the ballot this fall.
I know that a few of the other parenting groups have been doing some good work. I'm not sure. I think Gender Cool Project had something that they were working on. And I would also, looking at some of the other, like She Should Run types of resources, if you're looking to get involved in the fight directly. And if you're looking for just like tracking in terms of what school boards are up to, I'd actually recommend looking into your state equality group. I know that Equality Virginia, for instance, has been doing a tremendous amount of work monitoring school boards and monitoring what's going on there. So state equality groups have been an excellent resource for some of the more local fights.
Thank you, Reg, for being a good sport and just jumping right in here and answering questions. We appreciate that. Thank you all for attending, and thank you to Kelley and Reg, and we will see you all soon, hopefully this week. Something else with us.